Um, Good afternoon, everyone. I was just thinking while I was waiting for the introduction, it was a year ago, I think almost to the day, that we kicked off our first labs experiment with an enterprise. And I'm thinking that how much has changed in 12 months. And so what I want to try and do in the next 10 minutes is actually whiz you through a year of use cases and practical applications where the things that we were talking about 2 years ago in terms of theory are actually things that we're starting to see realized. And I want to do that through the guise of the API of Me. Very, very quickly, for those of you that have never heard of Meeco before, we enable individuals to participate in a peer-to-peer relationship with their government, with their telco, with their bank, with the organizations and people they trust. And we allow individuals to bring their data, their documents, and their identity into a transaction to create mutual value. Why we've been hearing over the course of the day so many of the drivers, and the one thing that I would really love to communicate is that there is so much opportunity in many of the stick aspects of the things that we've heard today, whether or not we're talking about GDPR or we're talking about some of the regulation. We know the issues around privacy, trust, data in silos. We understand the issues, the friction with onboarding. We understand that the regulatory drivers are there. And there are some great themes that have come out today around innovation. And that's really what I wanted to whiz you through in terms of the proof points that we're starting to see that these things are enablers and they're backdrops and they are forcing change, but they're also opening up an enormous opportunity. And what is that opportunity? It's really around how we can use the technology that is developing now in a very personal way, in the same way that we've seen huge value, whether or not you look at manufacturing over the last 50 years, or whether or not you look at the way that B2B relationships have enabled a more effective supply chain, or created surplus or net new value by the way that organizations or infrastructure or ecosystems are formed. We see that the exact same thing is possible with you and I, as customers, as citizens, as patients, as students. Wherever we are directly in a value chain, the technology exists now for us to be intimately involved with the value that's created. And so what does it take for you and I to share in that? We see this as the API of Me. We think the secret weapon for any organization right now is its customer. That is the platform of the future. When you start to think of the ability for each of us to manage, control, aggregate, consent, touch, everything that we wear, do, ingest, soon will have some sort of data input, output, and how that amasses in one part of our life. And the ability for us to bring that into an ecosystem to other parts of our life, to have the discretion to share that on our terms, to create mutual value. And what we've started to see through working together with enterprise is actually how participation is really driving value, mutual value for the participants. And the biggest key to this is transparency, and as a result of the transparency, the building of trust. One of the other things that we look at always, and this is a precursor to a GDPR, is how do we work towards minimal viable collection for maximum viable access? So what is the information or the data that you need in this moment to provide an amazing outcome without having to overreach in terms of the information that is being collected? So the fit for purpose in itself creates enormous value. So I want to take you through 3 use cases very, very quickly. This one was for a mining services company in Australia. They have a predominantly variable workforce where they are actually onboarding employees or contractors that may be with them for 6 days, 6 weeks, or 6 years. And when we first talked to this organisation, the problem that they thought was around their HR onboarding. But as we started to actually dig in through a Meeco lab, which is essentially a sandbox environment to bring real data or real customers or real employees and their information into a design environment, we started to see that actually this organisation specialises in verification services. that their contractors had to be cleared to fly on a daily basis out to an oil platform. They needed to pass drug and alcohol tests. They needed to prove that their license was not just available, but valid and up to date. So there was an enormous amount of checking and rechecking. And then in the field, in very remote places, offshore, in the middle of the desert, their contractors were actually the people taking responsibility to say this electricity grid can go live today, or there is a problem with this cable. And then a lot of this was actually paper-based tasks. So when we started to look at the issue for the organisation, we could see that there were a whole host of disparate problems. And what we simply did was say, what would it look like if we could organise the data, the tasks, and information flow specifically around the individual. It would take hours for me to explain a lot of the byproducts that have come out of this project, the wins, the verification of data. The thing that I'm most proud of in terms of what our team has achieved is that one of these engineers, once they've onboarded and they've had their tasks endorsed and they finish a contract, they actually have those tasks endorsed and verified for them to take to another organisation. And so it's not just a case of I'm an engineer that does X and Y, but I'm an engineer that does X and Y in this highly specialised area, and I've done 30 of these plant shutdowns in the last 18 months. And so what we were able to do is actually create for the individual an enormous amount of value. The flip side of that was huge benefit to the organisation that provides this service, but also to its customers. The other use case that I'd like to take you through very quickly is simply how, through the API of Me, a customer could act as the unifying factor across the bank and a telco. In some parts of the world, for those of you that know me, I'm very passionate around Mobile Connect or any regulated environment where people have given strong identity and been able to prove something for them to have access to that in another use case. So in this scenario, we looked at the opportunity to help a digital bank open a debit card, very low risk, using a Mobile Connect API, and through the whole process, allow the customer to be the one to say, I'm happy, first of all, to go through this process with the bank. I'm happy for you to check with my telco around these identity attributes. I'm happy to receive my bank account in a digital way and understand that there may be some background checks, but there are some low transactions that I could get started with. But more importantly, at the end of that, all of the data and documents associated with that process are given back to me. And I now have a direct channel open with the bank and the telco for an ongoing relationship. And obviously that opens up a whole host of opportunities for conversational commerce, using chatbots, or for different levels of authentication depending on what the product or service is. The last one is very dear to my heart. Some of you may have heard this story before. About 4 or 5 months ago, I was in France to see a customer, and I managed to get robbed not once, but twice in the same day. It was over a long weekend in Australia. Despite the great relationship that I have with my telco, that I've had mobile phones since they came out, I had good credit rating, my banks were closed, Visa said 14 days to be able to come to the rescue. American Express said 6 days was the soonest that they could get me a card. And I wandered around Paris for a couple of days realising that, I was no different to a lot of the displaced people that were living in the street. I had no method to prove my identity. I had no way to access my bank account. I had no way to vouch for me until something physical turned up. So this is a really interesting use case where we've been looking at, once you've been onboarded into a trusted relationship, then through different levels of authentication, choosing which ID provider you want to use, how could you use a range of authentication methods to prove it's me right now in this place next to this ATM with a one-time ability for me to be able to withdraw cash. The only upside of this scenario is when I went to see the police to fill out the police report, I had everything about my entire life available through Meeco. the policeman asked me how on earth anyone would have such a thing. And he said, "Did you build this for today?" And I was like, no, I was not planning on that to happen today. So very quickly, to round things up, what we've found over the course of the year working across telco, finance and government is consistently where the customer or the citizen is actually included in designing and participating in that value chain, what we see is net new value. And whether or not that's increased advocacy for the brand or whether or not that's a willingness to share more information, we also see that there is strong possibility to create small ecosystems within communities. And it's also very interesting the things that people are willing to share once they feel that there is the transparency of how the information will be used. I'd be very happy to talk to you afterwards around some of the learnings from there. So the last thought that I would like to leave you with, and we're seeing evidence for this, we understand that the only way that we're going to start to change this paradigm is to find this mutual commercial intersection. And what we see time and time again is that organisations that are willing to share the information that they collect about their customers with their customers for mutual benefit are starting to unlock all manner of value that hasn't existed before. Customer intimacy, lowering friction, meeting compliance, creating those wow moments. And I think what we see, particularly in the financial services sector and in telecommunications, there's a huge threat to OTT services. And one of the great opportunities of customer intimacy is really this chance to come back to serve the customer in a way that can not only create new opportunities in the digital world, but actually return to some of those old-fashioned mores that we had around serving customers and trusting in the brands that we interact with. So thank you.